Cold open question of the day, Chris Manning. We had a viral moment this week where Tyrese Halliburton, the star of the NBA Cup, was found to be, by Ringer host Chris Vernon, in the deep internet hawking wrestling t-shirts. So my question for you is, what would you go that deep into the internet for and come out the other side with an item?
Number one, I like the little
It says item in hand.
Yeah, but it's also like the Italian kind of thing. So I just like the energy. I want to just say that I like the energy coming my way from you in this. I have two answers to this. I'm going to answer one for right now, and then I'm going to answer one for like when I'm in my 60s, if that's cool with you.
Go for it.
Okay, number one. Now it is, if I like records that I love, original pressings. Like, not a modern remixing. Like, if I can find a Beatles record that isn't going to ruin my bank account from, like, the 70s, I want that. I think that's cool. Some of the sound nerds I've seen on the internet have suggested that's a better thing. The version this when I'm older is just is physical media in general. I'm gonna be dying under a pile of like DVDs and books and vinyl because I just like physical media. So when they're saying like, "Hey, the Kindle is how we're doing books now," or whatever it is, I'm gonna be like, "Can I just like get a physical book? Can I get one of the 100 copies of a book that comes out?" That's my fear, and that is where I'm gonna go. I want physical media forever and ever and ever.
I went exactly the same way because it's not just liking physical media or the transition that may or may not be happening. It's also just a lie. It's not happening because all the stuff that they said would be available as far as like movies and TV goes, it changes platforms. It goes on, it comes off. It's over here, it's over there. This company owns it that I'm never going to subscribe to, so now I effectively can't watch it, or I just have to give Amazon $5 at a time. They lied to us, Chris. So it is absolutely movies. It's movies for me. It's Get me an old movie that the director doesn't want on streaming. Get me a commentary edition of a DVD from a director that's cool. All those things. That's me all the way back. But also, you said not breaking your bank account. This is Tyrese Halliburton, so we didn't say anything about things being cheap here. This is probably some very expensive wrestling T-shirts that he found.
Yeah, considering I just went to a WWE event and the prices on merch that is Fanatics branded like and made, it how expensive that is. I'm just assuming what like a vintage like Triple H DX Nation T-shirt from like the 90s 2000s costs. You know, let me ask you this before we go into the main show, Brendon. What is your like number one, if I see right now, like movie that you would like to get on a DVD or Blu-ray? But I am a Blu-ray person, to be clear. So, but obviously, like, you know, the player, it's a whole thing. But what's your movie that if you saw it right now in the wild, they're like, you'd be really tempted to find it online, find it from Criterion, and buy it?
I've never seen the movie The Long Goodbye, and I would like to watch that movie, and it is available nowhere. That's the one that inspired this answer because it is the kind of film nerd movie that gets brought up very often, and it's only rentable, and I'm anti-Amazon, so I have resisted thus far. I'm hoping to find it in some like used bin or something, and I thus far have not been able to. So that would be my answer. You will find me on the dark web searching for The Long Goodbye. Let's get to Slop of the Week, the NBA Offseason regrade, and Magic Hour featuring Steve Ceruti from The Ringer next. This is the Just Basketball Show for Wednesday, December 13th. Welcome. I'm Brendon Kleen. That over there is Chris Manning. Follow us if you have not already on your favorite podcast app and YouTube. Give us 5 stars everywhere. Subscribe, comment below on YouTube. Engage. We get helped by that. Thrive Fantasy is a player prop daily fantasy platform we want to tell you about. A great partner of ours. You can pick more or less on your favorite players over there across multiple sports, including the NBA and NFL. And when you sign up, use the code JustBasketball. Thrive will match your first deposit up to $250. That's code JustBasketball for a first deposit match up to $250. Also, check out our TikTok account where we have pretty much daily prop advice videos coming your way. Just follow us there for great stuff in general. We have a regrade of all the big NBA offseason moves coming. Talk about Fred VanVleet, the Chris Paul trade, and more. And we have Steve Ceruti from The Ringer coming on to close out the show for our weekly Waving the Flag segment. He is the most famous Orlando Magic fan that I know of online, Chris, and he joined us to talk trades, Franz, Paolo, Suggs, and the future of that young team as they sit second in the Eastern Conference. So stay tuned till the end for that. But Slop today. We got a lot of it, Chris. And it is probably the team we have slopped over the most since we began this program in February, which is the Toronto Raptors. And this comes from Shams Charania. I'll just give the highlights. They might trade Siakam and OG. Scotty Barnes is untouchable. And Siakam being on an expiring contract means he's the more likely of the two players between himself and Anunoby to be traded. We could debate if they're going to actually do this and blow it up or not. I think we've done that like 5 times as we've slopped over these guys. I wanted to visit 2 specific destinations because I think... Go ahead.
Can I just say one thing first? I'm reading the reporting and looking at it again right now. The thing about this that is always the funniest this time of year is to see how it is reported in terms of the Raptors are or someone believes. In this case, it is in the someone believes category. This is the line. But Toronto has lost 3 games in a row, stands 9-13 on the season, and has left teams believing that now, more than ever, either Siakam or Anunoby could be traded by the February 8th deadline. This is other teams more than it is like projecting this a little bit, which I always it's potato. I don't know how much it actually matters right now because we're
because I don't think
away.
The Raptors actually ever talk. So I don't think the Raptors are a team you will ever find. Team sources say they are actively shopping Pascal Siakam. Like, we don't get that from Toronto.
Yes, so it's a reminder that this is out there, but it could be pick a team, really kind of wishing for something.
Sure, putting pressure, saying, your guy's available, isn't he? And then he may not be. But let's just start with Siakam because I've thought since last year's deadline that they should have dealt Siakam.
Yeah.
I don't think that he fits with Scotty Barnes. I think that the version of Siakam that exists now, especially in the comfort of the Raptors where he has kind of been the man for a while now, is a very slow, methodical player who plays inside the arc, is kind of a power forward who doesn't always shoot a ton of threes at the level that most NBA power forwards at the highest levels do, and could just use for a change of scenery at this point. Shooting 21% from deep this season. Assists are down, rebounds are down. Maybe not the point in time you would love to be trading him, but here we are anyway. I just don't see him being the future of this team at age 29 going on 30 with a new contract coming up. I think we're in agreement there. But all those things also make him a difficult fit elsewhere. And so the destination I wanted to throw your way is one we talk about often on the show, which is the Sacramento Kings. I have seen a lot of casual NBA fans, and I think even in our comments, because we cover the Kings so often on YouTube, people there seeming to want Siakam in Sacramento. I think this has come up before when we did our 5 trades to fix the Kings thing a couple weeks back. And I think you had them on your list, and I dismissed it because I just, again, don't see him playing at that tempo. But that's in the report here again. What do you think of the Siakam fit in Sacramento? And if the Kings are going to be aggressive and the Raptors are finally open to doing this, do you think it happens? Do you think that's the match here?
It's my favorite match, I think. Atlanta, I could also see if they're going to say we just want the guy who's clearly better than the guys we have, and you talk yourself into that. But I really like Jalen Johnson. He's hurt right now, and is it worth spending more assets when you've already given up a lot of assets like that? that's a real that's a little more complicated, I think. I like the Toronto one just because, number one, I think it gives them just another really high-end player. It gives them another big wing. It's an upgrade on the Harrison Barnes spot, who is not going to dominate the ball as much as Siakam, obviously, but also I don't think is naturally inclined to play at this upscale tempo all the time. And I also do just think if Sacramento is going to evolve, if Sacramento is going to get further and find a way to evolve this group, I don't think having a change of tempo option is bad. How you sort that out, and who does he pair best with in the staggering, whether it's Sabonis or Fox, I think is open to debate and an interesting question. But I think just having another change of tempo, betting on the talent that's in his prime as your guys are in their prime, and trying to maximize this era and getting another defender who's just better than Harrison Barnes, I just like it as a bet. Even if there are some questions to figure out, I think I am just more bullish on that than I am the other places. From Indiana, fine. Atlanta, fine. I get it for both of them. I think Sacramento is just the one that has the incentive, I think, to go for it a little more aggressively, and has a need at that kind of specific spot and player size.
The interesting thing about it, and actually I think the reason I don't like it, is because he actually plays so similar to Barnes. You know what I mean?
You would want like them
heavy. Yeah. Not
so
a
you
great...
want them to. You're saying rip up the template of Harrison Barnes and get something completely different, like at that spot.
I want somebody who, ideally, shoots more threes than Barnes does, or at least is a more dynamic three-point shooter than Barnes. Might be the better way to put it. I know that they kind of have that at other spots, but if I'm thinking long term, I don't know if Kevin Huerter is on the team at the best iteration of the team, right? Keegan Murray, I kind of want him to do a little more and not have to be so spot-up oriented. So maybe he isn't quite the shooter, high-volume shooter that he currently is if he actually expands his game, if that makes sense. So I kind of want that at the 4 spot. Doesn't have to be somebody shooting 10 a game, but Barnes is just, he kind of has to be wide open, stand still to really make any of those threes. And I want somebody who can provide rim protection next to Domantas Sabonis. And there's so many strange things about Siakam to me, but one of them is, despite playing some center over the years, and I think they could play him at a small ball 5, but I don't love that. Mm-hmm. And despite being as tall as he is, which is, he's listed at 6'8", I think he's taller than that. I don't know. Feels like he is. He definitely has a plus 7 foot wingspan. He has never blocked shots. He's not a big turnover forcer on either steals or blocks. So he's really just this guy who kind of takes up space, is athletic, but not as much as he once was, and positionally guards guys that are like-sized. It's kind of what Harrison Barnes is in a weird way, even though they're not exactly the same player. So I hear you that having somebody who can slow things down makes some sense. I wouldn't be like out on the Raptors if they got Pascal Siakam, or out on the Kings if they got Pascal Siakam, but I think there's better fits for him and better fits for the Kings. What about the Hawks one though? Because that's the other one that's been out there.
Yeah. Just one less thing on the Kings. This is what I would say as a devil's advocate to that. I think the market that they're in and the way the trade market seems to go is that sometimes I think teams are having to make trades. They have to make a choice, let's say, let's make a trade to get better. That's an imperfect fit that maybe isn't as differentiating as we would like in terms of style. Or you wait for something that's never going to come. And I think there is a risk, I think, in waiting too long if you're Sacramento. And I could understand if you want to say we want to find something different. You're worried about the cost or whatever. There's definitely this isn't like a perfect A+ banging home trade. But there is a risk, I think, of waiting too long if you're them. And that's why I might be a little more willing to just kind of stomach some of that. Just to say we're actually trying to make a step forward and we're not just going to bank on this just continuing to work, because that's just not how the NBA works. The NBA never works if you just hold all your chips and figure it out. It didn't work for the Thunder back in the day. It won't probably work for the Thunder now, even if they have all the draft capital in the world. It just doesn't work, though. You have to make decisions at certain points. And the Kings, as good as they are, as good as Fox is, and you should feel optimistic about their future, I do just think this might be a point where you got to make a decision and try to do something.
It's all fair. I agree. I think we are in agreement that there needs to be a sense of urgency from Sacramento. And if they say Siakam is the only thing that's going to happen for us at this deadline, but we need to push our chips in, I don't hate that. It's also going to cost a lot. So, that's not a factor that I always love talking about until we get details of what the package might look like. But, of course, that would factor in for the team. Atlanta, I'm honestly at the point with the Hawks where I don't know what they need. I don't know what I want them to get because they're a deep roster, but they're 26th on defense. I'm not convinced there's a pathway out of being 26th on defense when the two guards are who they are on that team. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if Siakam or Anunoby really do anything at a significantly higher level enough that better than Jalen Johnson or Saddiq Bey or DeAndre Hunter that I'm convinced those guys take the Hawks from where they are to something bigger. But I think that says more about Atlanta than it does those guys.
Well, and I think it's also because Atlanta has so many guys at in those nominal bigger wing positions that are a little more cost controlled, particularly like in both cases, and are younger. Even if we're not sure they're going to be as good, they have. I mean, Saddiq Bey has to get paid. I'm not the biggest Saddiq Bey guy, but he's around. They have AJ Griffin. They have DeAndre Hunter, who's I think a little bit underwhelming and on his own contract. And they have Jalen Johnson, who I think has kind of established himself as the best one, but he's hurt, and that's a bummer. The other part of it is, I think, Brendon, that they also made the DeJounte Murray trade. So they've already given up some assets. And they just paid him. So you're, A, kind of committed to that, and B, you gave up all these picks and things, so your asset chamber is a little bit different. It just is. When you make a trade like that, unless you can recoup the value on that guy, it's hard to go out and make another bigger trade like this. And if we understand Toronto in any way, it's that they asked the sun and the stars and the moon and everything in between for their guys, particularly these two guys. That's been all the reporting the last several years in any Raptors trade. So I think that kind of to me makes them even if they'd like to do it and you could turn Saddiq Bey or DeAndre Ayton into one of those guys, I would be probably just before that in a vacuum. Like if you just said, hey, we got Siakam instead of DeAndre Hunter and we're going to pay Siakam maybe a little bit more, but we're going to pay him going forward instead of Hunter, I wouldn't hate that. They're only a couple years apart in age. Hunter's like sneakily a 26-year-old already. So I get it, even if it's not a slam dunk, but the asset part of this gets really tricky to me for them.
So I actually like Anunoby in Indiana. That's one that I
do too.
Could get behind because, as I think the whole NBA world has talked about a lot, Anunoby's desire not only to get paid on his next deal, but likely do a little more on offense is a part of what he would want, what would make him happy. And while you and I have talked before and I've said I don't think Anunoby is at the level of player on offense that you just sort of open up the floodgates for whatever he wants to do with the ball in his hands when you acquire him. I think being on a faster-paced team next to Tyrese Halliburton could kind of just build in more scoring opportunities without having to give him the ball. And so I kind of think there could be a middle ground there that keeps him engaged on that end and kind of fulfilled. But obviously they need the defense. So I think that one makes a ton of sense. And we've heard that Indiana will be aggressive. I have one for you for Anunoby that hasn't gotten talked about for months, but was at one point an Anunoby suitor that has gone over a lot of transition lately and might not be in the market, but that I think should be. And I'm giving you the time to maybe guess where I'm going, but it doesn't seem from the look on your face that you know, so I will give it to you.
Well, no, can I guess? Let me guess.
Go. Yeah.
Well, you just said puh, so I think you're gonna guess. You're gonna say Portland.
I am gonna say Portland.
I was gonna guess you're gonna say Memphis or Miami would be one of the two.
And they might still be in the market. Memphis, I have no idea what to make of. 1 week, T-minus 7 days until Ja Morant returns, which I don't know if you looked ahead, but TNT went ahead and snatched that game up. So that will be a very big story next week.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about it. Also, the fact that like the biggest Memphis headline as of right now is what Ja Morant testifying that he hit a teenager to protect himself. So just quite a season.
The footage of explaining a check pass, that didn't seem real to me. I don't know what's going on there.
Brendon,
the whole from the Memphis Grizzlies.
The whole Ja thing just feels like surreal in a lot of ways. But we'll talk about him when he comes back.
The Trailblazers, their guard glut didn't go away. They still have that. And Anthony Simons is playing he's been back for a short time, but I think he's averaging 28 a game. He seems to have expanded his kind of on-ball creator skill set to another level and is leading them as a lead guy to wins. Scoot Henderson is playing a lot better since returning from his injury and coming off the bench, having to do a little less. And I've loved Shaedon Sharpe's approach to his offensive game this season as a much more patient two-way guy that feels like I can see the vision for him as a star a lot more than just the guy chucking shots at the end of last season. So that's kind of a good place to be in if you're Portland and you know you may need to trade one, is that the kind of stock is up on all three. I still don't think you can start all three. I still don't think you can close with all three. And there's a lot of change we're going to see from this team, I think, in the coming years. But why not flip one now for OG Anunoby, who is still in the prime of his career and can, at age 26, still be part of the next good Portland Trailblazers team. If they liked him before, I don't see any reason that they couldn't still like him now and pursue him at this deadline.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because if they were, it would tell you a little bit about what they want to be in the short term, right? You know, if they go get OG, I don't think, and you already have Ayton, so you already have someone in that age, kind of that age range and that price range as well. You're kind of not just comfortable waiting around and letting draft picks accumulate and building that way. You're kind of willing to hit the gas a little bit to try to get better. But it would also be a really smart talent play, and I think if you were going to keep those guards, I mean, the one I would want to keep Shaedon and Scoot over Simons. I just think that's just where I would be at that. I mean, there's other changes I think Portland is going to have to make and other upgrades they need to figure out, and Scoot certainly hasn't lit the world on fire this year. It's been a real struggle of a rookie year for him in a lot of ways, injuries and play quality for both kind of fair reasons for that. But yeah, I would get it if I were them. I think it's not the sexiest landing spot for OG as a guy who could, I think, make an impact in a playoff series, obviously, and be someone that we see as a 16-game guy, you know, for a late basketball season guy. But from a team that needs that kind of thing, has an interest in him before, it would be funny also to see them make that trade after Damian Lillard has left.
It would, but it makes sense, right? I mean, you see the vision. I feel like I got you on the hook a little bit here. I imagine a future where you can put Scoot, Sharpe, Anunoby, another forward, maybe it's still Jeremy Grant, and Ayton on the court, and I think that team could be competitive sooner than later. I mean, you mentioned their approach and kind of how they see themselves in the future. To me, it would be reasonable for them to look at their roster and say that they have their building blocks already. Mm-hmm. They've picked in the top 10 the past 2 years and gotten exactly the type of offensive engine guys that you want to kickstart a rebuild. And they have more picks and other stuff incoming, and they have more players that they can offload, Robert Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, maybe DeAndre Ayton. So I don't think bottoming out makes sense. I think they kind of already should be in stock up around the stars mode. And if you can get guys that fit the skill set and the age range of that young core, why not kind of get out ahead of it a little bit and avoid some of the desperation we just talked about with the Sacramento or in Atlanta, and just be like, here's our team. We did it in 6 months and let's go. You know, I think more teams should approach it that way rather than let's feel it out. We want the players to tell us what they need. And I mean, we're seeing it in San Antonio, right? Anyone could have told you what San Antonio needed, but they decided patience was going to be the key word for the season, and it's holding guys back. And they kind of are just, shooting themselves in the foot a little bit. So Portland's been more competitive than I would have expected, and I think that they should not be afraid to kind of keep their foot on the gas.
I agree. I think it's tricky. I also, just from the Toronto point of view of this, I just hope they trade one of them. I think it's time. I think it's time to just do something a little bit different here. Trade both of them if you want. I also just think it's also the Scotty Barnes thing that came up in this, where it's like he's been deemed untouchable. It's like, no shit, they didn't trade him for Kevin Durant. They're not trading him for a pile of shit at this. And he's better now and having a great year. Like, you're not just going to trade him now. Like what? Like you trade the other stuff to emphasize Scotty Barnes. You're not, and maybe get another draft pick to draft another really good young player to pair with Scotty Barnes. You're not trading Scotty Barnes to build around Siakam or Anunoby or restart the front. Like that's completely silly. Like, of course Scotty Barnes isn't being traded.
As much as I want to use that as an opportunity to segue to Jakob Poeltl as our first regrade here, Chris, I'm not going to do that. We are into our NBA offseason retrospective. We're going to go through 7 or 8 of the bigger moves, and that includes trades, signings, sign-in trades, and see what we think now. Basically, what did we think when they happened in June, July? How are we looking at them a quarter of the way through the season? And what does that mean for the future, the rest of that contract, the rest of this season on the trade market and more? So why don't we actually segue a different way to a similar team we were just talking about, Chris, which is the Deandre Ayton trade, which involved the Portland Trail Blazers. For those who might have forgotten, it was only about 2 months ago, Deandre Ayton and Toumani Camara went to the Portland Trail Blazers as part of the Damian Lillard trade, which we will not be examining because we talk about that on a weekly basis. And the Phoenix Suns got Yusuf Nurkic, Grayson Allen, and Nasir Little. I'm tempted here with Portland being, as I'm looking at this, 17th in defense. They fluctuated between like 10th and 15th most of the year, Chris, to feel pretty bullish about the Ayton acquisition for them overall. I know we can laugh, and I made jokes about the viral video of him setting screens very dramatically for, effect, which was, very chef's kiss Deandre Ayton moment. But him plus Toumani Camara, who's been starting for them as a big forward option on a defense that's working, was this trade a win-win?
I guess, but the Ayton thing on offense is still just like a little weird to me. He's playing the second most minutes he's had per game, about what he played every year in Phoenix. He's taking 3 shots fewer per game than he did last year. He's shooting about the same everywhere across the board, and he's averaging a career worst 12.9 points per game. Some of that I certainly just like, hey, like the guards aren't probably feeding him the exact kind of looks that he's used to. It's not the same quality of creator, and I think for a big man like him, he's really dependent on that. But he's fine. He's fine. I think everyone is mildly happy with this. I don't think anyone's you would know better than me on the Phoenix side of this. I don't know if they're jumping for joy over every single guy they got and what those guys are giving them on a nightly basis. I think Nurkic has probably been a little better than I would have expected, considering he was pretty bad towards the end of Portland. But Ayton's been fine. He's fine. He leaves me wanting. I think it's weird, again, that he's scoring less this year. That doesn't totally make sense to me, but I think everyone's mildly happy with this.
You just explained why he's scoring less. It makes perfect sense to you.
But
you know who he's not playing with? Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant. So there's your answer.
Yeah, but it's also just wouldn't you? To some degree, I'm also shouldn't he? Shouldn't he just get spammed looks at times, or are these guys just what's the deal? Just feed.
He can't make those shots. Is what's the deal? I mean, we don't have to pretend like it's 2019 here, Chris.
I know. He's fine. He's fine. DeAndre Ayton to me is like if there's a scale and you feel positively or negatively about a guy, he to me might be the closest guy I have in the league to 50%. He's fine. It's him and Jared Allen are the captain of those teams.
Sure. So I think the other part of this is Ayton versus the pick package that the Heat could have given the Blazers, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that simple because there's also the Drew Holiday component, and I think most of us would agree that on the whole, the route that Portland took was the smarter avenue. But there is still a world where I think they just said, no players, we don't care about competitiveness. Let's just try to spam as many picks as we possibly can out of the Heat, and they probably get more overall picks and more future stuff. In that context, I still can't really convince myself that it wasn't the right call for them. I think having Ayton, because of what we just talked about with the Anunoby situation and the point in time that the Blazers are in, the more that I watch this team, the more that I thought about the package, I still feel like this makes a lot of sense rather than rolling out a roster that still doesn't do any favors for Sharp or Simons or Scoot and isn't competitive on defense and just lets them chuck things up. I think going for structure with a little bit of future stuff and kind of towing that line, going for both, I would give this, I don't know, are we doing real letter grades here?
We can. We didn't set parameters. We can vibe our way through this. I think we could do that.
I feel like I would probably give this like a B. I think it's good more than it's bad for the Portland side. And I still get it, even if Ayton offensively hasn't been anything, because I kind of expected that.
Let me ask you about the Nurkic side of this.
Yeah, let's go to Phoenix.
So he is if you just look at his numbers, scoring wise, shooting wise, it's lower than he was even in Portland. When I watch Phoenix, I don't feel like he's a big negative. I don't watch him and think like, oh, that's a problem. But you're watching this team in person, day in and day out. How has Yusuf Nurkic, who I honestly can't believe is 29, he feels like he's like 30, 32 to me. Just like in my head, I feel like he's 32. What has Nurkic been for Phoenix? Has it worked? Was this worthwhile for them?
Open question, but I think the level that the Suns were just out on Ayton has to be factored in here. Like, the kind of fairy tale world where the best case scenario happened for Ayton is something Suns fans have been rooting for since the finals, and it hasn't happened, and that's going on 3 years ago. So if you're comparing it to what else was realistically out there, which once again, as far as the draft was in June, was like a poo-poo platter from the Mavs. They wouldn't even include Josh Green or the pick that became Derek Lively, and the Suns were able to turn Ayton into 3 role players. This is not just a Nurkic trade. The other 2 guys have been impactful for the Suns too. I think Grayson Allen has probably had the highest highs of any of them. So
yeah, he's been really good.
He matters here too. He's shooting like 50% from 3.
You know who could still use Grayson Allen? The Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah.
I'd rather have Grayson Allen than Malik Beasley, I think.
Fair. Me too. But I don't think either one is solving their defensive issues, which is the big problem over there. No. But yeah, I think from a Sun standpoint, Nurkic has been passable. He's been what you would have hoped for him to be. His rim protection has been better than expected. He's blocking more shots than he did before. The 3 isn't going in, which was kind of predictable. But he's a legitimate offensive fulcrum for them. Getting the ball to him in the post or on the short roll and having him work as a playmaker has been a real part of their offense. And that's more than Ayton was ever going to do. And so I think there's been nights watching them this year where I look at that team and I see Nurkic just as a playmaker, and I'm like, that might justify the trade in and of itself. His ability to do that. That might be the whole thing. They knew their stars were going to get swarmed on defense. Devin Booker gets blitzed almost every time he runs a pick and roll, and they wanted somebody who could catch the damn ball and make a good decision with it. And DeAndre Ayton was never going to do that. So it might have been about that way more than it was about the defense. But even if it was kind of partially about defensive, hoping that Nurkic could be something on defense, I think he's been okay there too. There's going to be matchups he can't play in. That's fine. We all know that. The Suns probably need another center at the deadline, but I think overall it's fine. So I would probably give both sides a B for this one. What do you think?
I think B is a good grade. I think the Phoenix side of it, much more at stake for this season. Obviously, Nurkic needs to stay healthy. He's a little bit down within 3 feet, and you might just think gets back up above 60% at some point within that spot on the floor. Is it 57 or somewhere around there? I believe last time I looked. He gets better
Layups
there.
For him are a complete roller coaster. You never really know.
Which for a guy who is in the middle of the paint a lot, tough. Also, just like doesn't offensive rebound, which is like always funny to me when you're like that big and you just don't get offensive rebounds. But
I don't think that's fair to say he does an offensive rebound. I think he's had plenty of nights this year where he gets on the glass. I think rebounding in general for the Suns has been a big issue.
Yeah, just like on the aggregate, he's not like gobbling
Sure.
up.
Gobbling. He's not a Robert Williams out there or something. But yeah, where do you want to go next? B. B is a really not sexy place to start, but I think as you're looking back, B is a fine grade to have. But which one do you want to hit next?
Let's go to the Lakers because I think this has not worked out exactly how I would have expected, if I'm being honest with you. Like who has been good and who has been a little bit is kind of surprised me a little bit. I think, number one, I think Reaves and D'Lo have both had ups and downs. Reaves has been maybe a little worse than you would have liked. I think D'Lo has been fine. I would still trade him tomorrow if you got the right contract, but D'Lo's been inoffensive to me in what he's done. Christian Wood, I don't think really matters to me that much. He's really good if you watch any of the highlight videos from the NBA Cup. Number one, best facial and hand reactions and gestures on the sideline when LeBron did something cool. Christian Wood. There's the value of Christian Wood. I think Taurean Prince has been awesome for them. I think Cam Reddish has been a very deserving starter for them, has played, I think, the best basketball we've ever seen him play in a very contained role. And then Gabe Vincent just like hasn't been very good. He's been the Miami guy. There's another one on this list we'll talk about. And he got hurt, but like I just don't think he was that great before he went down. Like he wasn't like quite where he left things off in Miami. So maybe he gets back to, but I think
7%
on the aggregate
from 3. Gabe Vincent.
Pretty bad.
I mean, we got to be fair. He played 4 games.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Did you scour those games? I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful to the guy. He's limping around here. Let's give him a break.
Okay, I did go back and watch like a bunch of his shot attempts, so like I did actually go back and look at this a little bit. But like he's played 4 games.
That's so. I did not know that.
That's the thing. So it's just like that. It's not been a great start for him. He'll come back healthy. LeBron shouted him out, and maybe that works. But I think Reddish has been much better than I could have thought. Prince has been really good. And I think Reaves and D'Lo have both been competent in their own ways. Reaves obviously better, D'Lo inoffensive. I think this is like a B plus collection of Laker guys. I think particularly just because Reddish has hit more than I would have thought.
What I love about this Lakers offseason is that it just added to their identity. We talked about them a lot last week, obviously with the NBA Cup and even into Monday's show. And I think I said at the end of that show, and I think in passing at other times, that the defense feels even better to me this year, especially now that Vanderbilt's back. And I think that's all what Rob Pelinka did this offseason. Prince and Reddish in particular, and even Wood at times, frankly, even though he's very inconsistent and not trustworthy overall, they're just able to be huge. Almost all 48 minutes. And obviously when LeBron is playing with the level of energy that he started the season with, he's kind of another component of that. But some of the lineups they're able to throw out, especially when Russell's not on the court, are just, there's no small walkover defensive option, whether you're looking for somebody on a switch or you're trying to run a set to exploit a certain help defender. There's just nowhere to go, and they can force you into turnovers. They can just squelch things out at the point of attack. It's crazy, and it just amplified what they were already good at in a very cool way. As far as the point guard stuff goes, to me, I think it is kind of explainable by Russell just doesn't fit on this team to me. I don't know what team he fits on. It might not be a good team. I'm sorry, but it's a long time into his career. I don't think that's exactly the craziest thing to say at this point in time, despite what him and Bruce Brown may have said to one another in that game. So that's that. And then Reaves and Vincent, I feel like Reaves has been pretty good since, early in November. And Vincent, I think, will be better when Reaves is better. So I feel like October was just weird, where Vincent maybe had to do a little too much, wasn't comfortable. Reaves wasn't doing what he's supposed to do. And it just left everybody kind of searching for answers, and the Lakers got off to a little bit of a cold start. But I think when Vincent comes back, we'll see a better version of him. I think they probably will trade Russell, and I think that'll kind of solidify everything into the identity we know this team is eventually going to have, which, again, is just massive and swarming and physical.
And that team can win a championship. I think there's teams that I think are going to be better, but this is a contender.
Let me ask you that then, because you kind of said this in the last show too.
Yeah.
Do you like them more against Denver than you did last year? Because I'll remind you, they did not beat Denver in the playoffs when they faced them.
I do, but it's partially just because it's somewhat LeBron and somewhat I think that they just feel bigger a little bit this year just with the guys they've added. I do think that's gonna and Denver doesn't have Bruce Brown anymore. I do think that matters in that series a little bit. Like those young guys are gonna have to prove it. I still think I would favor Denver. I would probably favor Phoenix over LA as well, but I don't think it's inconceivable that the Lakers get out of the West. I don't think that they're in the list of teams that I think could do it. It's probably those three teams I would really look at right now.
Okay, well, they could have won a championship last year if that's the criteria.
I think it's more likely.
I think it's last year.
I think it's more likely than not. I think it's more likely than it was last year that they could beat Denver and get out.
Because they just feel they can just switch better 1 through 5 and just match up better.
3 reasons. Switch better. I think that is something you kind of got to do. Secondly, I think being that big and they just feel bigger to me, it's back to their bubble DNA a little bit when they were just big. And yes, AD hit a lot of jump shots, but our team was also big. And the most important one, LeBron's playing a lot better than he did last year. And we'll see if he can stay healthy. The minute stuff, it's all a real concern just because of what history says. But LeBron at this level I just think it puts you in a bunch of conversations. It just does.
Yeah, if LeBron is here and AD is here in April, I'm on board with you. But we got a long way to go, and I do think that they probably change their roster as they always do. So I kind of still feel the same about them, even if I like the additions and Davis feels at a higher level because he hasn't gotten hurt, but that's always a yet, right? So
yeah,
we'll see.
LeBron 2-week follow USC around the country tour is what I'm suggesting for the sake of their title hopes. Just follow Bronny around for a couple weeks.
I bet you he misses the East a lot right now because in the East he could have done this and they'd be number 1 seed by a mile and he could get some back-to-back rest and things like that next couple weeks. And now that's
do you remember when he just went to Miami his first year back in Cleveland and he was everyone freaked out about it? Just he can't do that now,
No, because the Lakers would lose every single game probably, and then they would be 9th in the West by the time he got back. All right, let's pivot to Fred VanVleet. The Rockets have come back down to earth a bit from where they were, but I still think that they'll factor into the play-in race, which when we checked in on them last, I think is kind of what we said was their destiny. They've continued to defend their asses off. Their 108.3 defensive rating, second in the NBA, but the offense has gotten even worse. And considering that Fred VanVleet is kind of supposed to be the answer there, and yet once again, the Rockets are kind of in the Raptors zone of how their team looks when you compare one end of the floor to the other. I think it's okay to say that Fred VanVleet is not an all-NBA caliber offensive engine that can lead you to a great offense by himself. He's also not making twos. He's at 39% from two-point range, but he's not turning the ball over either. He has good chemistry with Şengün. The money I kind of throw out the window, Chris. I don't really care how much they paid him because it's the Rockets and they were bad and none of their young guys are up for extensions or anything in the near future. None of the really good ones. So I guess Şengün is, but it's fine to have one. The money doesn't bother me. I just come back to the same thing that I've said before, which is we're starting to get to the point in the season where they're not so far ahead of everybody else in the West anymore that it feels less reasonable to sacrifice the development of some of these guys just to be 500.
I largely agree, but I also think VanVleet has helped Şengün. I really do think there's been a benefit there. I think if there's what you said is true, but I think there's still a lot of value in this from a leadership in the locker room perspective. I think a culture perspective for this team, because that's just VanVleet's that kind of guy. And I think with Sengun, there's the two-man game and the leadership and everything in that partnership is, I think, very structurally key to what the Rockets are at their best. And I don't think you would necessarily have this exact kind of Sengun emergence, breakout, whatever you want to call it, if VanVleet is not the point guard on this team. I think that partnership at the core of this is a reason I still feel okay about this. You're right. The money is just, Fred, you got paid. Congratulations. All the money stuff is true. He'll be off the books by the time they have to make other decisions. That's just how this will work. But he gets paid in the short term, and I do think there's been a boost with Sengun because of VanVleet. And if they're running out of rookie point guard or Jalen Green is running a lot of the sets for this team, that just wouldn't be the exact same because the feel, the composure, the willingness to give up the ball at times, that's not there from the younger guys. It is there from VanVleet, and I think that has had a real benefit, at least on Sengun, who has been the most important player for this Rockets team this year, I would argue.
The other thing to remember with this VanVleet contract is that it's 2 years and basically like $84 million, really, because the last year also is a team option, which came out after all the initial news and makes it an even bigger no-brainer for Houston to me. But interesting number for you. Both VanVleet and Sengun on for Houston. 115 offensive rating, basically. Just VanVleet, no Sengun. 103 offensive rating, which is like awful. Just Sengun, no VanVleet. 126 offensive rating. So maybe this whole season for Houston has just been the Sengun breakout.
I think it kind of is. I think that's just what this is. I think all the other stuff is fun. I can certainly tell you, Brendon, they're coming to Cleveland soon, and I'm going to get Donovan Mitchell and Dylan Brooks in the same building again for the first time since last year. Pretty excited for whatever that's going to look like. But this is the Sengun breakout, and everything else is different gravy.
Well, so then how much different would it be if it was just Jalen Green running that
I think it
two-man
would be
game?
worse. Brendon, I think it would be worse. I just don't trust Jalen Green as a playmaker in that way. VanVleet, for the limitations, for the fact that he's not an elite offensive engine, the fact that this team is at best in the play-in probably, the fact that things are not quite as high as they were to start the year. And their offense is 21st. They're still 6th in net rating, 2nd in defense, cleaning the glass. I just don't think any of that's happening if you have someone who's not VanVleet or that type of veteran who is not quite an all-star but really respected, really competent, an extension of the coach on the floor in a really true but cliche way. I just don't think that's happening. What
if they had gotten Monte Morris?
I know
he's been hurt, but let's just pretend. Or Tyus Jones.
Maybe it's 80% of what he got out of VanVleet. I don't think it's exact 1-to-1, but I think that's about as close as you could get without sacrificing the big structural picture.
And those guys are making a quarter and a fifth of what VanVleet's making.
Yes, but
just playing devil's advocate, I think it was a fine signing, but as the season continues and VanVleet looks kind of human, I just think it's worth considering because Jalen Green is shooting 42% from the field, 34% from 3, 48% from 2. He's at worse than a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. It's almost actually 1-to-1. Haven't really felt like he feels comfortable most nights when I watch them. It's a lot of spot up opportunities and second unit stuff with the second unit not having much other playmaking. So then he's kind of overburdened. And Jabari Smith, who I've talked about before, is doing hardly anything on offense.
Just two things I would say. Number one, VanVleet is playing 38 minutes a game, which is just too many minutes. That's
As
Nick
always.
Nurse is still, that's Nick Nurse coaching him minutes. Maybe let's dial him back to 35, maybe 34.
Well, they have no backup point guard. They have Aaron Holiday is playing backup point for them. So what are they supposed to do?
Okay, but to your point, to agree with your devil's advocate point, maybe you get a couple extra minutes a game where Jalen Green has to just learn some shit, and you learn something about Jalen Green.
Mm-hmm.
Everything we're saying about Sengun is true, and we've learned a lot about him. I think we also just we're learning a little bit about Jalen Green and what Jalen Green is or is not. I mean, you don't
want to let him off the hook too much, right? And say it's everything else's fault all the time. He has to play better.
He absolutely has to play better. And you just, like, at a certain point, you kind of just, like, are what you are. Like, context does matter. I get all of that. But, like, to some degree, it's year 3. You kind of just, like, that's what you are at that given time. And that just might be what Jalen Green is, and VanVleet or otherwise. I think that like, he might even be more inefficient to some degree if there's no veteran point guard next to him. You know what I mean? Like, he might be taking 18 shots a game again, and the Rockets wouldn't be better if that were the case.
Yeah, he is. I think he's been a little better defensively, but other than that, it's hard to see a ton of growth from Jalen outside of just approaching the game as in a different type of role. But let's move on to, where do you want to go next?
Let's go to Nikola Vucevic, because I think this is a one we can get through pretty quickly. I understand, like, why they re-signed him, but I think in retrospect, if Levine was going to end up here and the DeRozan stuff was going to end up here, where he also maybe wants to get traded and there's no extension for him, shouldn't they have maybe just let Vuce walk and just started rebuilding this summer?
Yes, but if they were going to do that, you would probably also say they should have just traded the other two over the summer or last deadline. I mean, you could have been saying that forever, right? So
I think I probably would have, though. In retrospect, it feels like they just they shouldn't have done the Vuce trade in the first place. Probably
that's not like retrospect. We knew they should have done that at the time. Traded everybody.
Okay.
I mean,
okay, yeah. They should have probably just traded it. They should have just traded everybody and, like, not put themselves in a situation now where, like, Levine's hurt and it's, like, weird, and Billy Donovan's like, who is he making the kid? Caruso. He was like, Caruso should be an all-star. It's like, that man is being broken by the Chicago Bulls right in front of our eyes. You could have avoided all of this by just not giving Nikola Vucevic, who I don't really know what the trade market for him is like, at $20 million. Like, I think that's like a little.
Well, so that's
dicey.
The interesting part to me is, I mean, I think it's probably. I wouldn't go so far as to say they could have avoided all of this if they didn't extend Vuce, because they still would have had those other guys on the roster. It would have been step one in a rebuild.
40 minutes of Andre Drummond at center not doing it for you, you know?
Exactly. I mean, that's basically why I was much higher on this at the time than you. And that was pretty much my thinking, is like, what harm is it? But he's been even worse than I think anybody could have expected this season. He's shooting 45% from the field. He is down on pretty much everything across the board stats-wise. Looks every part his 33 years old right now. Their defense, which was their calling card last season, mostly when Drummond was on the court, mind you, but I would say that has not held them together. They're 22nd in defense. A lot of the things that I thought would hold over with Vooch haven't, so obviously that is going to make it look worse. But the biggest thing is he no longer looks like somebody who's serviceable enough to keep around while you're rebuilding, serviceable enough to trade without having to give a lot up. I just thought it would be kind of neutral, and it hasn't been that, and it now becomes a problem if you're going to have to give up a first-round pick to trade him, or you just bench him because he's hurting your team rather than just whatever, put him out there with the young guys and see what happens, you know? So if it keeps in that direction, then they do have a big problem on their hands. So I would probably give this one like a C in hindsight. We didn't do VanVleet grades, but we're grooving. It's fine.
VanVleet B minus. I'll give it a B, and then I'm going to give this a D. I just think you should have done it. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I just don't think you really needed to do this. Brendon, what I think the worst team mistakes teams are making now is like they feel like they have a guy who's like fine, but like they say, oh, we have to keep him. You can't just like not have the guy. I'm like, well, not paying him gives you other flexibility you wouldn't have otherwise. That could be an advantage in trades or taking on bad salary to reset in some way. I think you don't always need to just spend the money. It's not fair to the players. I'm happy Nikola Vucevic got $60 million. Good for him. That's amazing. Goes that being said, I'm pro players getting as much money as they can. But for the Bulls, especially just considering everything else, like if there was ever a sign, Brendon, from the universe that maybe it's time to just reboot an era, everything that has happened with Lonzo Ball in the last year, and it's just like, okay, like this might just be cursed. Let's just move on. It's going to take some time. It's not going to be fun. Let's just like actually tear this down and suck for a little bit and figure this out. It's like beyond time. You probably didn't need to do this. You could have kept the cap space open, and been a third team in trades and take on some bad money, get some extra picks. Like you're costing yourself some flexibility, I think, to be that kind of team. Even if that kind of trade doesn't exactly happen in the same way anymore as it did maybe 5 years ago, I just don't think you really needed to do this. I think you would have been fine without doing it.
They don't have cap space, to be fair to them. This was re-signing their
true.
own player. So I think that's part of it too, right? Where it's like you would have been losing him for nothing. You would have had no means of replacing him. You joked about Drummond for 40 minutes. That's like kind of literally what would have been facing them down.
Tank. That's some elite tankage, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, they would have patched something together, and that probably would have been the better thing to do. But if you were going to keep Levine and DeRozan, which nobody really seemed to think that they were going to trade those guys in the summer, then what you're really doing is kind of flipping a bird at those two. Hey, we're going to just get rid of your third best teammate. Sorry.
Could I ask you a hypothetical, Brendon, about the Bulls' big picture? And this is a question that if we ever have Ricky O'Donnell back at some point, I'm going to ask him, and hopefully don't hurt his brain. Is this a good job if you're like, if Arturas Karnisovas gets fired tomorrow and they say, we're going to give someone carte blanche to just run this whole organization and rebuild the Bulls back to their former glory? Is this a good job?
Well, if they gave them carte blanche to do everything necessary to rebuild, then of course it's a good job. Every job's a good job if you have carte blanche. The reason it's not a good job is the Bulls have never given their executives or coaches carte blanche to do anything. The vision comes from cheap ownership and, you know, whatever brain trust has been around for such a long time, and the desire to chase 30 wins no matter what. So as long as that continues, it's never going to be a good job. But the way you described it, sure, I'd love to live in Chicago and run the team that Michael Jordan played for and, you know, get a full-scale rebuild like it seems like Washington has given their executives the power to do. I mean, if it's like that, then I'll take it.
The other thing that they're doing that's very funny to me is, like, I get why they're doing it, but they're doing Ring of Honors, and they're going to do classes, and it's like, hey, Michael and Scotty are going to be back in town. Isn't that great?
Yeah. I saw some Bulls fans celebrating that, and I was like, things are bleak.
Yep.
Let's do one more, and we'll revisit more of these as we make our way through the season, I'm sure. But which one do you want to do? We have Max Strus. We have the Chris Paul trade. We have the Grant Williams sign and trade. Or we could close out with more Blazers talk and get to Jeremy Grant.
More. Let's not do the Blazers.
Okay, so you pick them out of those ones.
Let's do Strus. I think Grant Williams has been pretty interesting, and I like how they're using him as a ball screener, but I think I have more to say about Strus because I think he's been more impactful, like pound for pound, than the other guys. The Warriors thing and the Chris Paul thing, it's just I'm just like looking at it like a car wreck at this point.
I actually have one interesting stat on the Grant Williams side of things I pulled up because I thought we would get to him. This season, the lineup that I put in our season preview as the one I thought would be best, which is Kyrie,
right,
Josh. No, it's not king shit. It hasn't played together. Kyrie, Josh Green, Luka, Grant, and Kleba.
Yeah.
That lineup has played 2 possessions together this year. And part of that's Josh Green hasn't had a great season.
Yeah.
Maxi Kleba has been hurt as he often is and everything else, but that's pretty crazy. But yeah, go off on Strus. Give me a grade for the Max Strus experience in Cleveland this year.
I think despite the team like being pretty mid, it's like a B+, A-. He has actually generally expanded the offensive playbook simply by being a person who can stand off the ball and shoot 3-pointers that the other team isn't super interested in taking open 3-pointers. He's got some really nice chemistry in the short roll with Evan Mobley. He's super competitive, he is everything he kind of was in Miami as a defender, where he's not great, but you know he's going to fight, you know he's going to scrap. He's generally been, I think, worth it. And if I'm looking, I think him and Grant Williams are similar in this one sense, Brendon. We're not in a world where you're going to get big free agents really anymore. Like, you're not going to get all super locked in all-star level guys hitting the market anymore. You're not going to get max guys hitting the market anymore. What you can get is, if you spend your money right, you can get a mid-level to above mid-level quality guy, and they can be pretty good for you and add to your team. Strus has been that for Cleveland. That team, the Cavs are a bit of a mess in some regards. Their offense is wanting a lot of ways, so I think that you could ding Strus for that a little bit, but I think he's been additive 100% of the way, both ends of the floor, particularly on offense. He's given them something they didn't have, someone they trust, someone that I think has been good for this team, even if the overall team hasn't progressed in the way they might have hoped.
I think that's all super valid. The team is outscoring opponents by like 16 per 100 possessions when Strus is on the court. That continues to be the best net rating on the team, shooting 36% from three. He's one of those guys, I think the shooting percentage, the three-point percentage can kind of be misleading.
It's up and down.
He obviously, it's up and down, but also, he was cold in the playoffs last year and the year before. His movement and his decision-making on kind of how to operate as a quote-unquote like sharpshooter type, he's evolved to that like next tier, I think, of how those guys operate that like Redick and Korver got to, and I think Kevin Huerter is kind of at now, where the give and go aspects, the misdirection, the gravity, he's a good enough shooter that defenses have to respect all that stuff, and he knows how to play through missing. So I guess that would be my 2 cents, where he's still taking 8 a game, and obviously his impact is being felt, so the three-point percentage is kind of not telling the whole story there. But yeah, I mean, I've talked before, I think my favorite thing about that addition has been the way that he unlocks some of their small ball lineups, and looking toward next season potentially, or if there are any sorts of shakeups in Cleveland and they go smaller with Mobley at the 5 more often in the future and things like that, like you have to feel pretty good that he can slot in as a piece of that. I mean, I know he's only on a 3-year deal, but I like
4.
They needed
4.
Yeah, 4. Sorry. I know that, but I've liked that he's provided a template for what some of those lineups could look like down the road, even if some of the other personnel is different.
They signed a guy to do this stuff in the prime of his career. Like, that's not bad for agency work. The other thing, I think, to your point, Brendon, that he's added to his game a little bit, and I think it's a coaching decision from the Cavs to have him do this more than it is he couldn't do this before. I think this is one of those tactical things, is he's like been a very good rebounder. He has crashed the glass pretty aggressively. The first game of the year, he had, he said, a new career high in rebounds. And I was like, oh, is this just a weird one-off? Is this something that he's not actually capable of doing? But for the year, he's averaging a career-best 5.4 rebounds per game, which doesn't sound like a ton, but he was at 3.2 last year and 3 the year before. He is actively, I think, crashing the glass, getting more rebounds, particularly on the defensive end, for a Cavs team that sometimes, looking at the playoffs again, struggled on that end of the floor despite playing two bigs together a lot of the time. And Mobley in particular has struggled with that aspect of being a center. So I think he has come in and been asked to do that, expand his game in that way, in addition to some of the playmaking stuff. And I think that has been additive as well. But I think everything you said is right. He is setting something of a template for how they can maybe play smaller going forward. And he's just someone that I think was actually good money spent in free agency. And I think this is him and Grant Williams, again, I think are the kind of money you want to spend in free agency if you have the opportunity to get someone. It has to be guys that are additive and you can adjust a little bit in each way.
And considering all they gave up in the sign-in trade was Jetty Osman, Lamar Stevens, and 2 second-round picks, like that's no skin off their back, I would say. And to me, I'm going to give this an A.
Yeah, it's an A.
I think you have to. I think another lesson might be, even though there's a shoddy track record of how they play when they leave, Miami guys are one thing for sure, which is malleable and coachable. Like all the way down to Jaime Jaquez, who is like already a Swiss Army knife as a rookie. Like those guys are going to be able to step into a new situation and at the very least do what you ask. Maybe they're not as good when they're not playing under Eric Spoelstra next to other star players and everything else, but they will execute in their role. And I think Strus, we correctly bet that he would be one of the good ones, and I think he has been. So, I think you have to feel pretty good. That might be one of the better overall moves as far as kind of achieving what they wanted it to of the whole offseason.
It's the best thing that the Cavs have done since the league year turned over because they've been a real bummer. They're just like something's wrong in the water there.
You'll always have Max Strus, Chris. All right, before we get to Steve Ceruti.
Big Noah Khan guy, Max Strus. That's my guy. That's my kind of stuff right there. NBA players into sad folk music, Brendon. I need more of them.
Well, there you have one right in your backyard. Steve Ceruti from The Ringer, producer of the Ryan Russillo podcast, and more coming on momentarily to talk Orlando Magic for our weekly Waving the Flag segment. First, Homage is an ultra-comfortable specialty apparel company with NBA and WNBA licenses. There's an exclusive link in the show description to support the show. Buy your tees, hoodies, and more with vintage-inspired designs to pay homage to the greatest stories, traditions, and figures across sports, music, and pop culture. Again, that link is below in the show description. Click on it, buy something, support the Just Basketball Show. Now, Steve Ceruti. Here now is Steve Ceruti for Waving the Flag. He is a producer over at The Ringer and the country's biggest Orlando Magic fan, or at least the biggest representative of this team in the national media. We're excited to be joined by Ceruti and talk Magic for what we do every week, but it doesn't get a lot of love elsewhere. So we're hoping we give you a little bit of a platform to do more than a minute, hopefully,
nice.
Ceruti. But we'll start with basketball speed dating, which is a very intimate name for something that is very fun and simple, which is that I will give you some prompts and you will give me your one-word, one-sentence answer. We will do it all Magic edition this time around, since that is the spirit of today's conversation. The first question, your first favorite player from the Orlando Magic.
This is why I'm a Magic fan, because I didn't grow up in Orlando. So Penny Hardaway was the guy that was. It was Penny and Shaq really, but I love those little Penny commercials. I love the shoes, and I was like 6 or 7 I think at the time when they were like in the finals and making that run, and T-Mac kind of like solidified it in the early 2000s. But originally it was Penny. It was the jerseys. It was his game pre-injury. I love that dude, man.
As a Suns fan, Penny holds a place in my heart as well, although you got the best years out in Orlando. Next question, first jersey of an Orlando Magic player. Was it also Penny?
It was Shaq. It was actually Shaq, because I think it was a gift. I think it was gifted to me. Somebody knew I was a Magic fan. I was like, hey, these are obviously the one that everybody buys. But it was definitely the 34. I had the blue pinstripe Shaq jersey.
It's iconic. Chris, are the Magic jerseys the best in the NBA? I don't think we've ever had an argument about jersey styles, but it's up there for me.
Up there for me, and I think the pinstripe should just be part of the look forever. Like, even if they're going to say, hey, we can't, that's like not modern enough, or Nike is who's bad at their jobs a lot of the time right now. Just saying, as I'm wearing a Nike
I was going to say, as you're donning their gear, it's all good. I'm a Nike guy too. It's fine.
Look, the basics, incredible. A lot of the jerseys across all sports, pretty bad. But if you're going to say, hey, we can't have this as the main jersey, but it can be like your alternate every year, just make that like the city edition or whatever they're calling it every year, and that would be cool.
So I've heard that about rumors of a rebrand for a while, because they, even as close as a couple years ago, were still wearing the Dwight Howard era jerseys, which I hated. I don't like that weird V-neck. I thought they worked for Dwight because they were able to like expose his incredibly large shoulders and back muscles, because it was almost like a thin tank top more than it was like a normal jersey. But I don't like them anymore. They've slowly sort of changed them a little bit, but I've heard a major sort of rebrand is coming. And I think they were just waiting for the team to actually be good again, or like something to be excited about, other than like being the 8 seed and losing to the Bucks and the Raptors in back-to-back years. So I think that is coming, but man, if they just straight up went back to those OG pinstripe, the white, the black, and the blue, I don't think there's a better jersey it's certainly in basketball, maybe in sports. Like I put that up there with the Raiders NFL jerseys. Like any jersey in sports, give that like that. Especially the blue and the black ones, man. They're just so clean. They're so clean, and like the new updated Nike edition of that jersey, I think would be great.
There are so many teams, honestly, where if Nike asked me to sit down for whatever reason in an alternate universe and just give them my 2 cents, I would probably start and end with just go back to the 90s or early 2000s edition of the jerseys you already wore, bring those back, and
they do wear
you'll be good to go.
They do wear one of their alternates. I forget what it's called because there's like 9 different names now for all these jerseys. But one of them is, and I had this jersey too. It was the T-Mac jersey. Remember the one with it where it had just all stars in it? They do have that one. That's back this year. That jersey is, as the Europeans say, that's class.
It is. All right. Speaking of the Dwight Howard era, the Magic team you're most sure got screwed out of a title.
Screwed out of a title. Well, I don't know that the 90s team got screwed out of a title. So I guess I'd have to say, man, I don't like the phrasing there, because I don't know that I agree that any of them got screwed. I think people, Kevin Clark and I have talked about this a lot. I think the 09 team, I don't think people realize how competitive that series was, even though if you just look at it on paper, it wasn't competitive. They're a Courtney Lee layup away from winning game 2. All those games are competitive. I think the only real blowout one was like the clinching one for the Lakers. Like all those games were really competitive, and they were working Jameer Nelson sort of back into the lineup. If you remember, Rafer Alston was the point guard, and Rafer was playing extremely well. And I was on the time, like on team, like do not bring Jameer back. Like it's going to screw up the chemistry, and it kind of did. So I guess I'd have to say the 09 team. I don't think they got screwed, but I do think that team doesn't get enough credit for how good they were, 2, how revolutionary they were, because they shot just a shit ton of threes. Hope I can swear on the pod.
You can fucking swear on the pod. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. A shit ton of threes before anybody else was doing it. And that series, they could have very easily beaten the Lakers in that series in a different universe.
I mean, what they did to the Cavs in the round before, real quick, is just like that era, LeBron, like carrying a team. That Cavs team not that good.
That's what I was going to say. They were a bad matchup, but the Magic were an awesome matchup against the Cavs because they just had so much size.
Yeah. But just smoked them, and it's like, oh, that should tell you something. If like wins mean things in the playoffs, and if you smoke a LeBron team like that does say something in retrospect, I think.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree.
Last one. Player you can't quit. Somebody doesn't have to currently be on the Magic, pass through Orlando at one point in time, that you still hold out hope can become better than they are, even if they're already a good NBA player. Somebody you just think, okay, if they're in the right situation, they'll figure it out.
Well, my one before this year was Jalen Suggs, so I've nailed that one. If I have to go before Jalen Suggs, it was Mario Hezonja. I just always liked that guy. I wanted Porzingis so badly in that draft, and obviously I think he went the pick right before the Magic, and the Magic took the other Euro. But everything that people were talking about him, Hezonja, I mean, before that draft was that like this dude, like he had an attitude, he was confident, he was a good shooter, playmaker, like everything you want, and kind of like that modern Euro type guy. Not quite Luka, but like a Luka light type player who's like a playmaker, can make others better, but also get his own. And it just, I don't know, it just never worked out for him. I mean, that team was terrible that he went into. He played for the Knicks for a little bit. He bounced around. I think he's playing back in the Euro League, which is probably better for him. But I just will never. It's in another alternate universe, as I use that pun again, or that phrase again. I feel like he's a good NBA player. I just think there's a good NBA player in there. It just didn't work out for him whenever he got drafted.
He's not that different from Franz, like the best version of him, right? I mean, they don't play exactly the same way. I think Franz is more polished and a higher floor player, clearly, because Hezonja flamed out of the NBA. But stylistically, size-wise, it's not super different. So I guess it panned out in the long run. But speaking of Jalen Suggs, Chris, I will let you. I don't know if it's going to be a happy or sad question here, coming off of what Mr. Suggs did to your Cleveland Cavaliers last night. But take us away. Let's talk Suggs.
So I love Jalen Suggs. I am not there where some of the NBA and Magic subreddit is, where they're like, is this guy a Defensive Player of the Year candidate? But every single week, you watch that guy play defense, Ceruti, and he plays like he's a strong safety who's coming to just maul someone across the middle. It's like him and Caruso are the two guards that I'm just like, yeah, they could pick someone up 94 feet, and I'm not concerned. So even with where he's at offensively, I am just at a point where amid that guard rotation with Fultz, with Black, who's really young, obviously, and him, and Cole Anthony, that's the guy I think I like the most, just because he is such a demon on defense, and he's shooting well enough from three this year where even if you have to go find a better lead creator, or Franz steps into that role, or Paolo steps into the role, or something long-term as the lead, kind of keep the flow going, I just love how he plays basketball. I'm obsessed with the way that guy is playing and how good he is at it.
Yeah, and that's why I could not quit him, to go back to your earlier question. Like, I knew the first 2 years in the league, like he just, he couldn't shoot. He was weirdly like not finishing at the rim too, for being an athletic guy who gets to the rim pretty easily. Like I just kind of thought that stuff would turn around. Not necessarily the shooting that we've seen this year. He's been a very good shooter this year. And that's what they need. I mean, they just, if he could knock down consistent 3-point shots, he's going to be like a borderline all-star. Like that's a low end. I'm not saying I don't think he's at Franz or Paolo's level, but he's different in that sense. But he's certainly a first-team All-NBA guard, and I don't think there's a better defensive guard in the league right now than there is in him, because he plays there's a play. It happened probably a month or so ago when they were playing the Raptors, and it's like everything you need to know about Jalen Suggs. It's like 2 minutes into the game, and he just like he makes this incredible like diving poke steal. It goes right to Paolo, fast break, kicks it out to Franz. hits a three. They go up like double digits early, and it's at home in Orlando, and he's just like pumping up the crowd. It's 2 minutes into the game. 2 minutes into the game, he's losing his freaking mind. And like, it's that kind of like intensity. Like, he's a winning basketball player. Whenever anybody would ask me about him beforehand, be like, oh man, he's like a huge bust. Like, you must be disappointed in him. I'm like, I don't know. I watch the games, and the guy is a menace, and he gives a shit. And I just think there's a winning player in there. And I've seen so many guys go through Orlando where I'm like, oh man, like, I think there's something there, but it's not going to happen here. We saw that with Aaron Gordon. I think we saw that with Victor Oladipo. And I'm like, please don't let this be another guy, because I just think there is something in there. He's going to be successful somewhere else. And I'm glad it's all clicked in this year. But I think it's more about confidence this year. I think I think the defense is always going to be there. The intensity is always going to be there. But now they're winning, and he's able to contribute offensively. He's finishing at the rim. He's shooting in the mid 30% from three. I think all of that stuff has just like kickstarted, like, in his brain now, like, he's an all-star. He in his mind is probably like, I'm the guy on this team. And there's certainly more of a big three than there ever was before. And he's the perfect fit next to those guys. Because if you're going to have Franz and Paolo as these two 6'10" like playmaking guys, forwards with the ball in their hand, you need guards that are just going to be menaces defensively and he can knock down shots. And if Jalen's going to do that, he's going to be the perfect fit next to those two guys.
It's been interesting, I think, with Fultz out too, because one of the things I feel like I've realized about Suggs is the ball has to be in his hands more than it was for him to be at his best, I think, because he is still a guy who had the ball in high school and college and everything else, and you can't ignore that part of his game, especially if the jumper, even if it's better this year, maybe it gets closer to just average, it's never going to be a strength. So you can't just say go stand in the corner to a guy like that. And so I think that it's another unique dude next to a tandem of very unique dudes in Franz and Paolo that makes this team fun to just like think about. And as they add more stuff and kind of reveal more about themselves, I feel like we know more about the players, and I get more confused about what shape the team's ultimately going to take, which is what makes it fun. But let's jump into the other guys a little bit too, because we watched that Cavs game last night, and the amount that Paolo was involved, I loved. I mean, there's a lot of games where that's not always the case, and there's reasons for that. Turns the ball over, doesn't always have full control. He's a second-year player. Last night he did. Hits a big fall-away jumper where he just, shoulders into, I think it was Dean Wade, and then just turns around, pirouettes into a game winner, basically, that iced it. But what do you think of those guys, Paolo and Franz, Ceruti, specifically playing together this year, playing in a more structured environment, and how do they get better from here as we watch the rest of the season? Because I think that's kind of the main question about this Magic team that is a lot better than last year, but still struggling on offense, all things considered.
Yeah, I think, it's I talked about it a little bit before. If you have those two guys, like, your guards can't be normal guards. Like, I don't think you could bring a ball dominant guy in like a Donovan Mitchell when that trade was being discussed, or whoever's on the table. Because anytime, well, it's two things. Like, one, if you think that those guys are on the trajectory of being future All-Stars, which I think that they are, they might even be this year, who knows? Why are you trying to take the ball out of their hands? Like, let them. I'm okay with them figuring it out and letting them make mistakes. And I think last year, they got up to a 5-20 start, and it was mostly because like Fultz wasn't there, and they had to basically thrust those guys, and Paolo is obviously as a rookie, into like main ball handling roles, and they just kind of weren't really ready for that. And then Franz goes this summer. They end last season well. Franz goes to the World Cup. Obviously, Paolo goes too, but Franz goes there and wins it, and is the best player on the German team that wins the title. And like, he's just more confident in like running a show and running a team. So I think those two guys, like the way this team's going to have to be built, and it's why I've kind of pushed back on all these different trade scenarios, because they do have a lot of assets. They certainly had 2 first-round picks last year. And everyone wants them to make a trade for a bigger star or somebody else. And I'm just kind of content with, and maybe it's because we're in Orlando and there's not a lot of pressure. If we were in New York or Miami or LA, like, they'd be like, all right, let's get more stars. I'm just content with, like, let's see what these guys grow into. And the thing about the Magic team too, that's really interesting, is I don't know that there's like a better vibes team than them around the league. The entire roster of guys love each other. Each other. Like, when Anthony Black gets into the lineup and he's making shots, like, the team's losing their minds. Like, they're just happy for everybody, 1 through 12 on the entire roster. And there just aren't that many teams that one, are that deep, and two, feel that way. So I think you just got to let this team ride. Like, I wouldn't make any drastic moves over the next couple of years. Like, I would let Franz and Paolo, they're going to make their mistakes. They're not, they're not going to be probably the 2 seed at the end of the season in the Eastern Conference, but like, let them make their mistakes this year and grow and figure it out. My goal going into the year was we should be a play-in team. Like, we should be competing for the play-in spot, be one of the best 10 teams in the conference. It doesn't feel that difficult. And now I think I would probably say they should be just a straight playoff team. I would if they somehow got into the play-in, I'd be disappointed. But I'm not really ready to just say, hey, let's put our foot on the accelerator and try to put this thing into warp drive. Like, let them just grow organically, because they're still, again, it's a second and a third year player leading this team. Yes, they have a lot of nice vets. Like, I think Wendell Carter Jr., who's been out for a while, by the way, is one of the best value contracts in the entire league. He's an incredible asset for them at center. Anthony Black has been okay this year. I mean, I didn't even think he was going to play that much, to be honest with you, and then injuries happened. It's why I didn't give up on Jonathan Isaac, who I still think is an asset. Like, I want to just see these guys continue to grow as a group and not fuck with it. And then if there's a problem, if something happens and something doesn't work, okay, then you could pivot. But for now, the vibes are good, man. Just let it roll.
So what I'm gathering out of that is you would say no to Zach LaVine if the Bulls were like,
God.
hey.
No way. I think I've said this. No disrespect to him or whatever, I think he's my least favorite player in the league. I don't like watching him. I think it's empty calories, stats. I think he's just always going to be sort of a guy who doesn't play winning basketball. It's why, like, when people talk about him going to the Warriors, that I'm like, man, that's the last thing they need, is like some guy just chucking shots in Steph's face and not listening to Steve Kerr. And I mean, the only place I think it probably could work for him is like Miami, because they just make everything work. But I would not touch him with a 10-foot pole if I was the Magic.
Okay, so hearing you talk through that, I still think that there's a window there to upgrade on basically what Ingles and Harris are giving them, especially because those guys aren't going to be around forever. So if you could get something that is a player who can kind of shoot, is comfortable enough with the ball that it's not just a spot-up guy, and, fits the identity in terms of probably a little bigger, probably somebody who can take better matchups, bigger matchups, not have to have the, Franz and Paolo do that every night, especially Franz. I think that's where I still see a window to upgrade. But maybe that's just Black and, whatever comes in the draft in the future. I guess I just I see the window with those two players' salary, and I see how valuable they've been for this team, where the bench wins them games. And I'm like, well, hold on. Maybe you can turn that guy into like a 26-year-old or 24-year-old version of those two and get somewhere. I don't think it's LaVine either. Chris and I haven't really been able to convince ourselves of that one. I'm not even sure who the player I'm describing is, but that's been the thing I can't get off of, is like, what if you could just get a shooter who's comfortable with the ball? Maybe it's a bench guy. I think that could take them a long way, especially looking forward. Do you have any guys in mind, or are you straight up let it ride?
I would let it ride this year, but that doesn't. Yeah, that's right. That doesn't mean I would not make a trade in the future. But I think for this year, I'm comfortable with what. I mean, listen, you never know what opportunities are presented with you. Like, maybe somebody becomes available, and it's like, hey, this is a no-brainer, makes our team better, like changes our timeline a little bit, makes us a little bit younger. That's fine. I do like Ingles though, because I think you need, this team is so young that you need that. You need a version of that guy. Like, it just can't be all guys 24 years and under. Like, that's just not, that's so rare that teams like that win in the league. And I do think when everybody was making jokes about Ingles in the offseason about how, the Magic had all the cap room and they got Joe Ingles, what the hell are they doing? And I was kind of a little, not that I was upset about it, but I was like, I maybe expected more. But he's been incredibly valuable as a second unit ball handling, just guy that just kind of knows what he's doing, especially late in games. I mean, the one thing with the Magic that they've struggled with is kind of holding on leads late in games, and he helps that. That's the problem, is there's not an obvious guy. There just isn't an obvious. And when it was Donovan Mitchell, it's Zach LaVine now. There's been these names, and those aren't the kind of players that I'm looking to bring in. One guy that did intrigue me a little bit this offseason was Buddy Hield, because he was clearly available basically for free, it seemed like, from Indiana, because they didn't want him. He's playing a little bit better, so I don't know what it would take to give him up. But if this offseason, if I had to give up Jalen Suggs to get Buddy Hield, I'm not doing that. Cole Anthony was a guy that I didn't love, and now I've kind of grown to love, because he's really accepted the sixth man role and not thinking he's the best player on the team. So I just don't know. Again, things change. Like, you don't know who's available. Superstars, like, somebody's going to get mad and want out, and the Magic should obviously kick the tires on that whenever it happens. But I just don't think there's like an obvious, hey, yeah, go and get that guy right now, and it totally changes your fortunes.
The name that I would have liked before he went and got a massive amount of money from the Houston Rockets would have been Fred VanVleet, because you're talking about a guard who can come in and be the quote-unquote adult of a backcourt, but then also isn't taking too much away from Franz and Paolo. Like, to your point, you have to find someone who's like a little bit of a funky fit because it's Paolo and Franz, and there is a generation of guards that I think are coming up and more comfortable playing on and off a little bit. It seems like there's that kind of guard coming up, but they're not like ready yet, so it's like a hard thing to totally find that perfect fit. I mean, the other name that I think it would probably drive people nuts a little bit, and like it's gone badly for him in Memphis, but like you could have talked me into Marcus Smart as like, hey,
you can't have him
like,
and Suggs though, because they're the same. They're
no,
like,
that's true.
They're the same player, you know. And
okay, what if you bring
too.
the 90s jerseys, 90s basketball? Hear me out.
And just beat the crap out of everybody.
yeah, 100%. You're a football team then at that point.
Yeah, the VanVleet, I wouldn't have been opposed to the VanVleet thing, not at what the Rockets paid him. Not that it matters for them, because they're better, so good for them. Like, you know, clearly he was valuable, and I think they needed like an adult in the room on that team. But I with the Magic, like, I don't know, like another undersized guard, like I don't know that they necessarily needed. Like, would I take him on the team? Sure, but not for what it would have taken to get him. So I acknowledge that I'm being probably entirely too picky. I've been accused of this the number of times that I've been asked this question by Magic fans, but I just, unless it's like a clear upgrade, I just don't. You have all these assets you've built, you have all these this draft capital that you've drafted and that are now trying to develop. Like, just see what happens. Like, there's no, you're not better than Boston. Well, who knows? I mean, I think they've won 5 straight against the Celtics, and they play them on Friday night, so we'll see. But like, you're likely not beating Boston in a playoff series. You're likely not beating Milwaukee in a playoff series. I don't know if you're beating Philadelphia in a playoff series. So like, you have this window where you're good, but you don't really have the expectations yet. Just like, take advantage of that. Like, let these guys grow without us being like, all right, what do we need to do to like take the next level? Because that's going to come sooner than later.
So let's just close here then, because I think focusing on what's already there, they're good enough, right? I mean, I think we're a quarter of the way into the season, and if you use the end of last season, like, this team's been competitive, if not outright good, for almost all of 2023 at this point. So the young guys are a year older. I think Paolo in particular just feels a lot more comfortable. His turnovers are still high. I think that's the number one thing I'm watching for their offense is how can he continue to develop as just a guy reading defenses, whether that's as a scorer or a playmaker. But what do you want to see from the star tandem or just the rest of this roster, especially looking forward to 2 defense-first guys coming back soon, and Carter, well, Fultz, we don't know if it'll be soon, but coming back eventually, to get the offense where it probably needs to be to have a chance against the teams you're talking about or whoever they face in that first round. What do you want to see from the offense?
Well, they have a tough schedule coming up. They play Boston back-to-back, Miami, Milwaukee, Indiana. They play Philly in there, Phoenix, Golden State. I mean, they have like a pretty rough schedule the next, month or so. So I don't think they're going to just like finish the season as the 2 seed. I think if they're a solid playoff team, like if they're a top 6 seed, avoid the play-in, that to me is still an incredibly successful jump from what they have been the last couple of years, and certainly last year. And it was certainly a jump from what I expected this season. And I think from specifically on Paolo, I mean, Paolo, my biggest concern when they drafted him, and like, I famously or infamously, I mean, I still feel good about this, but I was like a Chet over Paolo guy. And not that and I will say, I think both guys went to the right spot. I think both guys are going to be really good. I don't know which one's going to be better, but I think, the Magic probably needed a guy who was more ball dominant, was more of an alpha, like number 1 option, like Paolo is, versus like Chet, who kind of plays second fiddle to SGA, as they already had a star out in OKC. But I think the jury's still out on that. But my biggest concern with Paolo before the draft was like, is he just going to be like a big who thinks he's a wing, and is he going to be like Julius Randle, who just is incredibly inefficient and is frustrating to watch, and yes, is talented and big and can look incredible and play bully ball at certain times, and for his size is like a good shooter, ball handler? Or, is he going to be like a bigger Jason Tatum, where it's a little bit more, he's more put together, he like kind of knows what he's doing a little bit more offensively. And I think I'm not saying he is Jason Tatum, but he's closer to that. And so I'm not that worried about the turnovers with Paolo. Like, I think, anytime you're a second year player and you're having that much of the offense put on you and you're winning games, I think, I'm willing to sort of forgive that and let sort of you grow. Franz is like a little bit more of a natural, I think, like ball handler, leader. But the thing with Franz is that he's way more passive, I should say, than Paolo. Like, there'll be times when Franz is like cooking and it's like, dude, you're the guy, like, keep going, heat check, like take a heat check every once in a while. Like, he's almost too conservative with the way he plays, which is why I don't think like you see him put up like 30, 40 points as much as some of these other guys, even though I think he's capable of it. So I do like the yin and yang of those two guys. Like, they're almost like, if you put them together, they fit really well, even though they're similar type sizes. And obviously they're both like big wings / fours. So my thing would just be continue to develop, continue to be competitive. They're hanging their hat on defense. And, if they can if they can somehow get a home court playoff series, like, that would be the dream. I don't know that that's super realistic. Maybe it is, but I think they can go into Cleveland. I think they can go into the Knicks. I think they can certainly beat some of those teams, even if they're on the road. So that would be the goal of the rest of the season. And then to your points about the trade stuff, like, see what's available. Like, if people are out there, I kind of feel like the guard rotation, with Suggs, Black, Fultz when he comes back, and Cole Anthony, I kind of feel like Fultz might be the odd man out because we've seen how good they can be without him. Like, I've seen people throw Wendell Carter Jr. in the trade thing. Like, I would keep him just because his contract is so valuable. But, maybe you could dangle Fultz and see what you can get. But I'm not in a huge hurry to make any major changes. I just ride it out, see what the season looks like. And then in the offseason, you can make bigger changes to try to take a whole nother leap the following season.
Yeah, Fultz is the one, though, that he hasn't come up, and I think that's right. He's kind of the guard of the like four guards that I'm kind of least intrigued by, and he's got $17 million you could trade, and like I like Fultz. I'm sure
a lot,
they are,
by the way, too. Like, I think he's way better than people think he is. He's not quite the perfect lead guard for this team because they do need more of a shooter, but he's been a better shooter than people want to admit. It's never going to be great. He's never going to be an all-star, but he's a very, very solid point guard in the NBA.
Yeah, I think he's the one that if I were to cut one of the four, he would be the one I'd be like, okay, you have a salary you can trade, it's expiring, like you do something with that. One last question about Jalen Suggs. This is the least serious thing you'll be asked on this show. So I am bald. I look at Jalen Suggs.
Oh yeah, yep.
His hair's going.
It's tough.
I know it's tough, but I kind of think he should go full Derek White.
Wait, Derek White mean like wear that weird like headpiece for a while, or just completely shave it off?
No, just shave it. Like Derek White looks much better now that he's just shaved his head. I think
agree.
he just has to. I understand he's young, so it's not fun, but I think he just got to do it.
22 years old. I never really had to deal with that.
Lucky, yeah.
So I don't really know how to handle that. Obviously, I work pretty intimate with a guy who did have to deal with that. I remember Russillo shaving his head the first time I saw him. I was like mortified. I'm like, Jesus, like this is intense. And now I could never even picture Russillo with hair. So it's one of those things where you're right. You probably just have to just get rid of it, and then just it'll become normal. And throw a headband on. That's what guys do, or become a hat guy. It's okay. But I think at 22, you're not going to tell any 22-year-old that it's time to come on home. Like, that's going to unfortunately. I mean, KD's been doing this forever. How long have we been looking at KD like big old balls?
LeBron's 40. LeBron is 40 years old basically.
Well, LeBron tried to get hair plugs and it just kind of didn't really work out. They just sort of grew differently. But
pre all the dudes flying to Turkey.
Correct. Yeah, he just missed out on that window, which is unfortunate for him because he has everything else. But I think it'll eventually have to happen, but you're not going to tell a 22-year-old, hey, I'm going to just give up on my hair this early in life.
Yeah.
How old did you shave your head? Well, how old were you when you shaved it?
Oh, 30.
Okay, so
I cowered it out. But here's the thing. I look back, should have done it at like 25. I think it was 25, just take the L, stop like messing around with it. I also save money, and not that Jalen Suggs needs to save money in the same way like I do, but like you can save a little bit of money. You're telling me he can't get like a free bird to send him a free thing in the mail and for exchange for like an Instagram post? This is economics, Jalen.
I don't disagree with you, but I just don't feel right telling a man that. I just don't feel right.
No,
so
I agree.
I'm gonna stay out of it. But it is noted on the broadcast. So I'll be like, damn,
okay.
It's not looking good.
Yeah, I noticed. I noticed it, and now I can't. Every time I'm like, that was a sick defensive play, and then he turns his head a certain way, and then I'm like, oh right, you probably also need to.
It's front and back too. It's here and it's here.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, once that it's over at that point. It's unfortunately just over at that point.
Yeah. One of these days.
Yeah, Chris,
Right.
I'll let you own that corner. I will not
he
be
needs to
weighing
write
in.
into
I will not,
he needs to
I
write
might
into
have to
life
face-
advice and ask, I think, is the answer.
We need Jalen on the pod one day, so I'm gonna back off on that one and just.
I will not
welcome
I
him
will
with
not
open
bring it up
arms.
to him in person, to be clear. I'll be like,
Great.
yeah, like your
Good.
hair's
Good call.
great. Your hair's great. Yeah, I can't do that.
I wouldn't
That's
even
not
mention
fair
it.
to
Don't
him.
even mention the hair at all. Just
No,
let it just,
looks
yeah.
great. Yeah.
No.
Just hi, Jalen. Hello.
He does
How are you?
enough on the court that I think we can fill 20 with him without getting into the hair. But that will wrap us up for this edition of Waving the Flag, all Orlando Magic edition, featuring Steve Ceruti of The Ringer. You know where you can find him. Check him out on all the shows he produces over there, including the Ryan Russillo podcast, which just made a brief appearance as we talked about baldness. We'll be back next week on the show, catching up on all things NBA. Talk to you then.